In 2013, Shinde Blackburn here was murdered in Queensland, Australia. The perpetrator and the individual who was arrested almost immediately was her now ex-boyfriend here. I forget his name right now. All of the evidence seemed to point to this man having been the one who conducted the murder. His car was spotted about 5 or 10 minutes away from the spot in which the CCTV camera picked up the actual incident, and you could see somebody running up behind her and committing the crime. He had also been quoted having said that he wanted to commit the crime. However, that did not matter in the courts in Queensland, Australia, when the forensic DNA came back saying that, well, he did not commit the murder. There were 17 samples of DNA, which all pointed to inconclusive evidence. They could not say definitively that he was the one, so they let him go and continued on, and I believe that no one was ever actually arrested for that crime. Now we fast forward to 2023, when more than 100,000 DNA samples may need to be retested as Queensland lab bungalow worsens. Essentially, they were cutting corners in this lab. They forego the scientific method in order to hit a certain quota and a turnaround time on the DNA samples that were sent into the lab. Now 103,000 samples need to be retested, impacting roughly 37,000 criminal cases where either the perpetrator was let loose and is roaming the street, or someone was wrongfully committed of a crime. And these were not just simple crimes. Most of the time, you don't need to go to forensic DNA testing when it's just a simple crime. These include murder and sexual assault, things of that nature. So this is one of the largest mess ups that I have seen coming out of any government agency in quite some time, and it all wraps around the idea of faulty scientific method, which you probably pieced together why I'm talking about it here on this channel, because we talk about decentralized science and the impact it will have on the entire globe here all the time in our videos. And unfortunately, this video is not going to be a super exciting video today, because from 2007 until 2016, Project 13, which was, quote, fundamentally flawed, was running rampant through Queensland, Australia's Government Forensic Science Division. It should have never occurred, the Health Minister Shannon Fentiman said on Monday. It was never scientifically validated. The DNA lab really did away with with scientifically sound methodology. They sacrificed that for speed. No individual was found to be blamed for implementing Project 13. It was literally an overall lack of governance. That is terrifying. I would much rather prefer that one individual was at blame here, but unfortunately it was the entire government's lack of legislature which led to this unfortunate reality that we're living through right now. Back in 2022, a whistleblower, Christy Wright, raised concerns that she claimed had not been addressed in the initial 2022 inquiry into the state-run lab. See, there was actually a podcast that came out about this murder case that I brought up here, in which they were saying, like, hey, the ex-boyfriend definitely did it, here's probably why. The reason behind it is that the forensic lab was, they forego using a manual procedure to extract the DNA in order to do an automated procedure in which roughly 80 to 90% of the samples had inadequate sample size. Like, there was not enough serum in the sample to actually get an accurate reading, and that was because the machine was messing up so many times. The machine was not able to deal with such small volume, and unfortunately, in forensic science, you don't get to you don't get to change how much volume you're given. What DNA they're able to collect is the DNA you have to work with, so you need accurate precision. And shout out Genomes DAO here for bringing this article to light and allowing me to speak on it here, because they bring up a really good point. You need to be careful who you give your DNA to. And unfortunately, Like, the people involved in this had no choice who they gave their DNA to. They had to go with this lab. And I really wish that something like Research Hub, for example, was a more well-known and more well-utilized service in which they could have put the entire methodology behind this automated process onto an open source peer review area where people could have gone through and looked at how they were conducting this scientific method here and see that they just blatantly weren't doing it. So we really, like, as unfortunate as this is, it outlines yet another major use case for decentralized science and the implementation of distributed ledger technology. Fentiman on Monday said, again, this is the health minister, that up to 103,000 samples may need to be retested, which will likely take roughly 3 years. She said legislation amendments would need to be introduced next time Parliament sits to extend the amount of time DNA samples can be held. Luckily, Project 13 stopped being in operation in 2016, but that doesn't change the fact that there's 9 years of samples that need to get revisited, cases that need to get revisited, people's lives forever were changed because of a lab trying to cut corners. Any response today should have put victims forefront and center, but instead we saw a government more interested in telling Queenslanders to move on. They're literally, the government's trying to save face here, and I understand that governments cannot function without trust from the citizens, but really, Australia, you guys are on thin ice in my eyes. I don't see how people can have much faith. And I would bring up something else that happened in 2020, where Australia really went overboard with some public health measures, but YouTube has some pretty sensitive guidelines around that topic, and so I'm not going to bring it up. A very unfortunate article to have come across my desk here, and I really am not super happy to make a video like this other than to tell you guys that this is the kind of stuff which outlines the use case for decentralized science. So if you ever had a doubt in your mind, more and more evidence is starting to pile up to show the need, the global need for some authenticity and for some transparency through the scientific community in and large, both public and private facing. Your time is your most valuable asset, so hopefully this was worth investing it into. If it was, feel free to hit that like button, subscribe, and follow along on this decentralized science journey.